we're going to give everybody a chance to join. And without further ado, my name is Dr. Sanjeev Kagram, Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Global Management. As you know, since the pandemic began, in many ways before it really became a pandemic, we began these Globinars for the express purpose, sort of three goals. One is often to showcase our incredible Thunderbird global community, our alumni, our faculty, our students, our staff, also our partner faculty and departments across ASU and many others, our partner organizations. Second, of course, is to take on the issues and themes and questions of the pandemic, the many unknown unknowns that we are all facing in this new normal or new abnormal or whatever we might be in right now as it continues to evolve. But three, and perhaps most importantly, is to continue to advance our vision of a world of sustainable, equitable prosperity and our mission of empowering and training and influencing global leaders and global leadership for the fourth industrial revolution. This particular Globinar is very close, as you know, to my own beliefs and heart. I wrote very recently with Nick Davis, one of our professors of practice, an article in the Economist Intelligence Unit, very much on this topic, and how, in fact, the pandemic has accelerated the transformations already underway prior to its start. So we have two, and so this is particularly timely in my view. We had a wonderful Globinar with our Indian alums yesterday that hit many of the same themes, and we're hearing this all around the world, no matter what the region or industry sector, issue or theme. But nonetheless, it's changing so dynamically, and there's so much more for all of us to learn and embrace and improve upon. So without further ado, we have two amazing panelists, Zahir Ali, most recent Masters of Global, EMGM actually, Thunderbird School of Global Management 2019. We're so, honored to have had Zahir join us. He has been and continues to be a research physicist and a world-respected agilist, manager, and technologist. Currently, he's Manager of Safety, Quality, and Software Product Assurance for NASA's Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, SOFIA, and many other things. I know that he is playing a leadership role in terms of the COVID response at NASA, among many other things. And so we're really delighted and honored and thrilled to have Zahir with us. Karen Oswald, who's also in the Bay Area, an MBA from the Thunderbird School of Global Management in 2000, digital innovation consultant, product manager, and writer, innovation and global digital transformation initiatives at Ernst Young, HSBC. Oh, too fast. Thank you. Gilead Sciences and many, many other Fortune 500 and global companies, FinTech advisor, FinTech executive education faculty that we need to have Karen join us with, and a certified agile product owner. Again, both Zahir and Karen, like all of our T-Bird alums, are true Renaissance, sort of 21st century Renaissance people, do so many great things in the world. Perhaps the most important of all T-words, just wonderful, wonderful people and human beings. So I believe, and just want to check, if we can go to the next slide. Just to remind everybody, of course, of our mission and vision, particularly our prospective students and partners that are joining us. Next slide. Just a few ground rules, our typical norms. We can control muting and unmuting. If you have trouble and you're going to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand and we can assist in unmuting you. We'd like you to use the chat window, of course, to type messages and share, again, who you are and where you're based, and particularly your affiliation to Thunderbird or ASU and whatever that might be. Please do open up the question and answer window if you want to ask a question. And as I said, click the raise hand button if you wish to speak, probably a little bit later after we get our opening comments from our speakers, our panelists. Next slide. So this is where we're headed. This is our game plan. And without further ado, I'm going to go over, believe to you, Zahir, and you have some slides that you're going to share with our participants, correct? Don't need me. Everyone knows me. There we go. There's Zahir. So Zahir, will you be sharing some slides, my friend?
You're on mute.
Zahir,
good morning, folks.
Okay, good morning. There you are. Okay, great.
Good morning from, I'm also in the Bay Area. And welcome to a discussion we're going to provide. I'm going to go through a quick little outline, and then we've got a few slides, Karen and I, and then we'll take questions. I want to start with a quote from Marcus Aurelius. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And in many ways, we choose to start with that because that's what we are seeing with COVID, is that there are impediments, there are challenges that COVID is exposing in our society. And what we're going to do is we're going to take you through a little bit update on what the crisis is, what the capabilities have broken down, but also talk about the fact that we have the power to deal with this. We're going to go through some micro case studies. Karen has an amazing model she's going to share about equity in the COVID-19 response, and then we're going to look at some realities for the future. So in very brief, the SITREP right now sits at over 275,000 dead worldwide, over 4 million cases worldwide. In the US alone, projections are suggesting that we could have 135 dead by August. And the cost is not only in terms of lives, but it's also in terms of the markets. The markets all over the world are whipsawing. There's massive unemployment around the world. And what this is doing is this is leading to real challenges being felt by real people. Karen, over to you.
Thank you, Zahir. So when the shutdown happened in response to COVID globally, we were hit with an initial shock that reverberated across all businesses, all countries, and beginning first with the workforce. There is an obligation that is necessary to health, people's security. They have fears. They're worried about transferring their business to home and how that's going to happen, and keeping their families up and running, educated, fed, clothed, etc. And it was incumbent upon the HR teams, organizational development, and hiring in order to manage those transitions. So what happened is it started with the workforce and reverberated out to the goods and services that were sold. We needed those teams in procurement and manufacturing needed to look at perhaps alternative delivery routes because of changes. They needed to talk to their vendors. They or still need to. We have a checklist that we have available if necessary, if people are interested, and a change in freight charges, impacts to delivery schedules, and documenting, and most important right now, especially among the supply chain for technology, is to document what you're doing and what COVID changes are being made, because it's likely that we may have to do this again, and that needs to be incorporated within a business continuity plan. And of course, all of the impacts to the workforce and the goods and services sold have immediate impact to revenue. How's that going to change revenue? A task force among sales, growth planning, strategy teams, and product is necessary in order to understand how long and how much cash is necessary to keep the lights on, the bills running, and people being paid. And if there's sources of government financing or private loans, who's in charge of that, and making sure that you have a good relationship with your financial. I've seen some good success from nonprofits as well as corporates. If they have a good relationship with their banking managers and their banking partners, things are sped along, and there's still opportunities. So moving forward to operations, there's a reduced capacity, and a task force needs to look at of the logistics, administration, accounts, payable folks, just to understand what needs to be consolidated, if locations need to be changed, et cetera. And I worked on a pandemic playbook that kind of goes through some of these, and we'll include that link later on in the call. And of course, mobility. This is a good opportunity for businesses to respond and increase morale. I heard of a bank that gave a lunchtime children's show, knowing that people had kids at home. They had a magic show. So it's a nice opportunity to play at the forefront and give some hope and some fun as well. And then also number 6, regulations are something that needs to be tracked. Once we do go back, how is that going to happen? We're responsible as businesses for our own compliance policies and how that tracks with government regulations and standards. Moving forward to the next slide. When the initial crisis hit, it looked very much, you might be familiar with this slide. It looks quite like the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grief curve. And we as individuals, families, and organizations are going through these various phases of grief in grasping the enormity of this crisis. And although it's hard to face, we have to walk through each step, and rather than sort of speeding through this, we have to absorb each step of the process. So, we've all gone through that phase of, hey, I can work in my pajamas, and how long will I be working in my pajamas? What if I lose my job? What if someone causes me to lose my job because we're not working well as an organization? And, I think we've gone through this downward slope. Everybody's listening to the daily updates of the stats and figures, and this is quite often in psychological terms and in business terms right now, this is the valley of despair, and we have 2 choices. That is to, there's pressure to sort of, okay, let's fire things up and flick the lights on back again and resume business. Yet business has changed now. There are some segments that are inaccessible. We still have risk in global environments, and I'm seeing, particularly on the funding side, a drive towards national strength. Yet there's still opportunities for goods to be sold, and business opportunities. If we follow analysis, it's a good time to be a consultant, because this is about process analysis. This is about checklists and making changes in order to document what our current crisis is, analyze the gaps, and address them with technological solutions. Once we do that, we can start moving upwards, accepting those processes and adding back to them. This is an iterative loop that needs to happen between employee management and technology leaders in order to make a recovery and do business in a new way, supported by IR 4.0 technologies. Next slide.
So, listing out some of these impediments that we're facing right now, the primary one that people are talking about a lot that has led to a lot of unemployment is inability to work remotely. Additionally, we're also seeing poor traceability of goods and services. As Karen alluded to, there's a tremendous lack of financing, particularly at the small business and individual contributor level, particularly lack of cash flow. Also, there are challenges with integrated tools. There's a lack of training and education. A lot of people that are unemployed have not been able to transition to remote work because they didn't have the right skill set. And finally, there's tremendous inequity in access. And that's going to be a critical portion of the discussion here coming up soon. So how do we advance this action? Well, Industry 4.0, particularly in the last 7 years, has emerged with a set of tools, and that's what these are. They're tools. They're hammers, they're pliers, they're wrenches. It's what we do with them that is going to define the next era of humanity. Artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, Internet of Things, and extended reality. Extended reality meaning the confluence of virtual reality and what is called augmented reality. These are things that we can use to craft solutions, and they're here already. The key is that we haven't implemented them in an integrated fashion. So our first micro case study is small business financing. How could we have kept our neighborhood businesses going? I'm going to provide two specific examples that we already have the technology to do, but we haven't had the will to implement yet. And COVID is going to drive us to make these things happen. First of all, local microfinancing. Microfinancing has won a Nobel Prize. It's been very effective in developing economies, but it was viewed as something that well-developed economies like ours didn't need. Turns out that was absolutely wrong. Using blockchain and web apps, one could have created a local, a regional set of apps, or a app that had a localization that allowed people to buy cryptocurrency tokens for local businesses at, say, $10. That token could then be redeemed for $11 in 6 months. What that would have done is would have provided these businesses with cash flow in the short term and enabled them to keep more people employed and themselves to stay in business. Secondly, we have become extremely reliant during COVID on Amazon and Walmart and Costco and and Instacart, other delivery systems. If we had already had what is called urban air mobility, specifically these are things like drone deliveries, drone taxis, and drone messengers, we could have kept a lot of our other businesses in business. Ones that were not simply food service and could easily be put into a grocery cart, but you could have kept boutiques, small shops, and possibly using different types of mobility and sterilization technology, created mobilization of salons, nail care, and so on. That technology, again, is available to us. We haven't implemented it. So what COVID has shown us is that we need to drive these things not just through developing economies, but through even developed economies to secure those that are the most vulnerable during these downturns. Secondly, reduced consumption. We're not buying as much stuff, but that's not exactly a true reduction in consumption. We are consuming digital products. So I'll draw the contrast between a few different organizations. So toy stores are famously going out of business. On one end, physical toys and physical objects people handle. On the other hand, the video gaming industry has never been stronger. In the middle sits Disney. Disney's parks are shuttered and they're losing money, and it's a major drain on their bottom line. However, at the same time, the Disney Channel streaming service has been the fastest growing streaming service in the last couple of years, beating even Netflix's growth. So what we've seen is that, how do we keep people buying goods and services? Those goods and services need to be mixed offerings, meaning physical and digital. If you're a fashion designer, can you employ, or a boutique, can you provide people with ways to consume your designs and your artwork and your products in a digital fashion? And as we move forward, we can help by using connectivity, social apps, robotics, Internet of Things, and augmented reality to enable these companies to pull in different types of customers so that they're not completely reliant on physical systems. One book that I always recommend to people on this topic is Capitalism Without Capital. It's a really amazing read that talks about data and intangible products. And the next micro case study before I turn it back over to Karen, is one on protecting employment. Did we have a way to keep people around the world working? And this is where AI, robotics, Internet of Things, and augmented reality can be employed in a different way. Because what we have the ability to do now is to keep factories working if we can enable remote access, if we can hybridize the job between human and machine, so that it's better to have a human operator present near the machine, but that human operator could also be at home. We could have kept factories working. Very famously, Elon's Tesla factory could still be operating if that had been implemented. And by using augmented reality, we can provide humans with the ability to view into these plants. This is also critical in terms of national and societal security, because what we've seen is that it's not only healthcare workers that are essential, but power plant workers, medical providers, fire departments, and water utilities. So those workers, particularly power, water, and fire, if we had automated hybrid human-machine systems, could still be doing their jobs remotely, rather than having to risk themselves in going in. And more people could be doing their jobs if that were more widespread throughout industry. Rather than view AI and robotics as a threat to employment, we have to use it to augment the human capability to deliver more value than humans have ever been able to deliver before.
Thank you, Zahir. You know, some of the best technological solutions start from conversations. And when I was an ideation consultant back in 2005 with Unilever's R&D group, there was a concern that using animals for testing purposes was costly, inefficient, and something that they didn't really want to share with their kids on Take Your Kid to Work Day. And, you know, the idea that there can be potential for zoonotic transfer of diseases, you're stressing out animals, it's costly, it's ineffective, gave rise to this idea of let's use robots for testing, which is now fully operational. You know, I'm sure I was just one of the people they had conversations with. This is a very, was a very complex initiative in the Netherlands as well as the UK. But we did talk about the string of movies that came out at the time. You know, there was Contagion and Outbreak, and which is about a virus that's actually accidentally created in a lab. The idea was we didn't want that to be us. So this gave rise to about 12 different robots that are used for product testing for personal hygiene products like toothpaste, shampoo, that are running 24/7. Not only are they running 24/7, but they're incorporating feedback data from active user groups. And there's always been sort of a social media group called Brain Juicer that is taking that data and using it for product suggestions and improvements, as well as targeting on the personal hygiene side, active markets. So you've seen men's products, products for particular regions as well, which has raised their revenues, as well as washing powders. And then there's also robots that test all across the board for antimicrobial and antifungal properties, as well as foaming agents that keep the products more effective and successful. So this testing across all product lines makes sure that there's product consistency globally as well. And moving to the next slide, oh yes, we went back to, sorry. So when the shutdown happened, and actually, you know, while you were speaking, Zahir, I was thinking of ways in which technology, in response, before we talk about Etsy for a moment, I want to give a shout out to Martin Oppenheimer from Montevideo, Uruguay, because this didn't happen just in the United States. There was this realization that we can't ignore the small and medium enterprises, not just in the United States, but in Uruguay. Martin worked with a client called dLocal to create and identify local businesses in Montevideo and give discounts and coupons and even advance purchases to make sure that those businesses could be up and running and continue to operate under the shutdown. So I think that's, that's one way. And as well as that, we have, I'm part of a network of independent consultants called Vertex. I think we had a little typo there. It's Vertex, Veritex. And the founder, after the shutdown, liaised with a member group. We had a call and we heard from a consultant who specialized in healthcare strategy. And he was talking about the critical need for PPE from day one. And the idea was we had several initiatives. And the first initiative was to get the CDC guidelines for mask coverings into the hands of cottage industries. Those are one-person businesses that are the bulwark of the American economy and who would be without revenue due to COVID, and because they're producing perhaps dresses or prom dresses. It's prom season. How do you shift from prom season to masks? And I was able to tap a member of a friend of a Thunderbird, CEO of Etsy, Josh Silverman, who responded to my email within 5 minutes and said, I've already got a team on this. Let's get a webinar with Headland Strategies and the CDC as soon as possible. And then they were off to the races. So what happened was, I think you may have already heard, it was national news. Josh made a lot of appearances on CNBC, on Fox News, and the stock price increased about 69%. I think a lot of that is momentum, but there was, 133 million in sales of face coverings, as well as this understanding that let's get raising the profile of the American entrepreneur rather than big businesses. Face coverings were the most actively searched item on Etsy for the month of April. And moving forward to initiative number 2, it was very obvious that there needed to be a centralized site, or at least one centralized site, for identifying demand and supply for PPE. Not only demand and supply for PPE, but also what the pricing was. And we saw, once this site was created by Headland, and it was all a group of volunteers that did that. You can see from the site, it's projectn95.org. You have the ability to see where the most demand is, and we see it's on the East Coast. And you can click in, you can register, as well as purchase and identify those purchasers. So and once again, it was on Bloomberg, it was on CNBC, Fox News, etc. So next slide. Moving forward, we talked about the crisis response, and when we talk about the wealth pyramid, it's very easy to, we all build this pyramid and we say, okay, let's look at the top of the pyramid, and these are the people who make all the decisions. And that's not the way we need to continue thinking. It's most important to start from the bottom at this point and work our way up. C.K. Pralahat in 2005 wrote a paper called The Wealth at the Bottom of the Pyramid. And people beneath the poverty line they don't need to be given things and be seen as poor, but they need to be given funding as entrepreneurs to realize their own dreams and visions and support their own families. There are more people that are going to slip into this segment if we don't rethink and remake the way we lend and pay people globally, but starting with our own communities. And microfinance is one of the chief ways to put money in the hands of people, and it will be paid back. There are better repayment possibilities for microfinance lending than there is for large loans. And we're seeing right now that the amount of SBA loans that have gone out, we're already expecting forgiveness, and those SBA loans are going to large companies rather than small and medium enterprises. We have the technology in order to support that structure, not only in microfinance, but in peer-to-peer lending applications and new ways we haven't even thought of yet, in order to create a more community-based, decentralized way of lending, paying, and selling folks. Now, moving up towards the working class. So that's the divided. And the divided can be supported by the digital middle class. We know that we are now farther from our retirement goals because of market slumps. We need to reevaluate our retirement investments. And I believe microfinance, blockchain investments and remittance markets are one way that we can create growth and actually realize retirement rather than just saying, oh, well, let's put it off. And then the investor class needs to, this is about more than just flipping the lights back on and resuming the business as usual. And not to ignore those folks in the middle. The working class are the requirements gatherers. They are all part of the supply chain management redesign that needs to happen, and the people closest to the activities are the ones who are going to give us the requirements, and they are all part of the same scheme. We might be this way in terms of economic disparity, but we don't have to be this way forever. So flipping this forward, the slide forward, we flip this pyramid on its head, and starting from the bottom again, this is not about, hopefully, we may be already headed there, but long term, we don't need another bubble economy that will slip us further into a recession. We need to invest for long term, looking at ways of, the middle class has been working, people in the Bay Area have been working from home I've been working from home since the last 15 years. So it's nothing new to me, but we need to look at different ways of communicating and collaborating and reverberating that out, rippling through different markets. What we do in the digital community needs to be reflected in IRL. And that means better identifying data that is used and transmitted within the process and supply chain, and going to the top of the pyramid here in this structure, people need the means and tools in order to feed and hydrate themselves. And that means clean drinking water and supply, and being able to grow their own fruits and vegetables, healthy foods in their own environments. And right now in Singapore, there are vertical farms. In the Netherlands, they're also testing vertical farms as well, ways of using space more efficiently in order to maximize the production value of the time of the investment. So that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Zahir now in order to wrap up.
Thanks, Karen. That is and what you just saw is really part of the heart of our discussion here. Is that the future must be now. It must be inclusive. The framework Karen just shared with you is what we hope can help to reshape the future. The reality is that black swans, named famously as a lesson that, oh, black swans don't exist. Well, when Europeans got to Australia, they found out that they do exist. They are events that supposedly no one can predict, but since Y2K to now, just in finances, black swans have been seen at an 11 times greater frequency. So that means that while we can't predict the unpredictable, what is unpredictable is happening more frequently. And what that means is that we can't prevent things from happening. Prevention in many ways is a myth, but what is not a myth is the ability to be resilient. And when and what the technology we have access to now enables that resilience if we have the courage to rethink our models and to implement it swiftly, not just in purely exploitative ways, but also to provide access and equity. And access and equity is really what the framework that Karen shared with you is talking about, is that if we provide access throughout different strata or of the economy, then we as a whole become more resilient. Now, what IR 4.0 technologies can do for us is that they're providing the technology and the ability to be secure in how we create that resilience. But the key is in integration, not replacement of humans. Finally, sustainability is the prize. That's what we're getting at. Whether it's in fintech or pure technology, right? Those tools have lifted almost 3 billion people out of poverty in the last 30 years. And yet we still stand on a knife edge, as we've seen during this COVID crisis. That means that we need to do more, and we can do more. The technology is going to enable us to create a sustainable and equitable economy in the future. And that's really what we're looking for. And so with that, Karen and I are very happy to take your questions.
So thank you so much, Karen and Zahir, this sort of tour de force. And I know that I learned a ton, and I'm sure our participants did as well. We're already getting some great questions, so let's move straight to those. The first one is from Derek, and he's saying, what sort of policy or legislation can help better push this transformation, this acceleration, these kinds of changes and adaptations that you're all seeing happen, but also recommending, advance even faster and more extensively? Yeah, Karen or Zahir, either one of you.
Karen, do you want to jump on that one?
Sure, I can start, because I'm in the process right now of, once this call is done, I'm putting together a microfinance proposal for a country, and GCAP, which is part of the World Bank, has a great website on microfinance and how to support, because this COVID has exacerbated existing conditions in the developing world, including the United States. And the UN goals are certainly a strong framework to start with. And the GCAP website, I'd be happy to share those links with you, is a good place to start.
And if I may just add, one thing is that it can be tempting. It's very tempting to jump to policy.
Right. Yeah.
But one thing I would ask you folks to consider is to learn the lessons from the environmentalist movement. Renewables did not replace coal. I mean, we've actually come to a tipping point now where renewables are cheaper than coal for most countries around the world. That's an amazing thing to say. I, as a boy, didn't think that would happen in my lifetime, and I'm proud to say that, in many ways, California and America led the way. But what was done, the way it happened, is that it had to be supported through economic subsidies and incentives until it was able to become cheaper. So what that means is that policy must not be draconian and prescriptive. What it needs to do is it needs to support these things from an economic standpoint and incentivize the economics of it. Because the reality is that people need the economic incentive, and companies in particular require the economic incentive to move on these things. So one idea that we've looked at proposing, me and some colleagues, is can we take the next bit of COVID relief, and rather than say that this is given to employers to just pay their people for whatever they can figure out how to do at home, rather it is, we're going to pay people to upskill. We're going to pay machinists and machinists to turn into CNC programmers. We're going to train draftsmen to become mechanical engineers, and so on and so forth. So we can support this if you want to go the policy route through economic incentives to adopt different integrative technologies and to add education and upskilling to workforces.
Yeah, and Zahir, if I can add one more thing too, the best policy are when business people are angry or someone is angry enough to want to change something themselves. We too often in a time of crisis look to others to give us guidance when there are things that we see that need to be fixed. And I've seen some incredible KYC AML policies come out of a friend who was angry when her apartment was destroyed by 911. I have seen some great responses very close to the healthcare industry when people are like, we need to address this now. And that's what started the our call to Etsy, as well as the Project N95. This wasn't let's wait for let's look on the UN website, but here's what we need to barf up immediately because this just has to happen.
Great. So we have a bunch of questions that are coming in through the chat as well as the Q&A. I'm going to ask everyone again. It's easier for me to keep up and get to your questions if you put them in the Q&A because the chat sort of goes away in Zoom. But I'm going to keep up as best as possible. Karen's here. Dal's asking, how do you see scaling up the use of IR 4.0 technologies in the near term to have an impact on COVID-19 adaptations? Specifically, and say excellent talk. I guess I want to add to that. In the India webinar we had yesterday morning, very early our time, there was a big focus obviously on the healthcare industry and particularly the transformation and the acceleration of telehealth, obviously all of that. The big questions that continue to be out there is how much can both the practitioners, medical practitioners on the one hand, and as importantly, the patients or clients or customers of healthcare really feel comfortable in a remote healthcare world. How that cultural transformation still is at its early days, and how do we support that? Because as with so many of these technologies, I think as you all have been sharing, the technologies are there. It's really the behavioral and cultural transformation that is lagging. So those two questions. So either one, Karen or Zahir, want to take one or both of those questions, which are kind of interlinked.
Maybe I can jump on that in short. So a lot of it is going to come, and this is where policy can help, in fast tracking the approvals of different technologies. And this is not bypassing safety, but what this is taking an approach that we use in national security, where you have expedited phase gating process to get something in the field quickly. And companies can help with that tremendously by being responsive. So what do I mean by this? So for example, I know of a couple startups right now that are working on getting medical device approval for being able to use AI recognition of symptoms via infrared and multispectral imaging. So these are different types of light that they can look at your face and learn more about your health by doing that. That is being a very slow process, even though it is a very non-invasive and high accuracy procedure. It's being put through the same process as if you were creating basically a stent that was going to go into somebody's heart. So those types of things need to be broken down, and there needs to be a realization in regulatory and approval systems that they need to bin the technology differently. In terms of the human side of it, we can't treat people as if they're being just Luddites and not adopting technology. What needs to be done is there needs to be awareness campaigns put out there about how accurate this is and how well it can be used. I liken that to campaigns for seatbelts. When I was a boy, right, I still remember new car, first thing, scissors came out, you cut the seatbelts out of the car. Nowadays, that you're like, what? Are you crazy? Right? It's inconceivable that you would do that. You use your seatbelt. But that came about through awareness campaigns, and making people comfortable and aware of the pros and cons of things and about the benefits to them. And that needs to happen as well. Technology and technologists need to step out of the realm of data from Star Trek, being focused on the tech, and bring the human aspect to it and help educate people about what the technology can do for their lives. Karen, did you want to add something?
No, I think we could move on to the next question.
Okay, then we have from Thomas regarding how digital capabilities will affect organization strategies in the digital era. According to Porter's generic strategy, an organization must choose a strategy that is cost leadership and differentiation to develop a competitive advantage. My question is, do you think organizations will integrate a combination of both strategies to develop a competitive advantage? Are these still applicable to today? Do organizations need to develop a more agile strategy? So it's really about how do we think about competitive strategy in a COVID fourth IR world?
Right.
Karen?
I'd like to take that one. Thank you, Thomas, for that question. I appreciate the thought you put into that. And having come from doing competitive intelligence work in Europe and in the United States, I really feel that our diamond model can be somewhat outdated, particularly in this environment. I think we are going too often back to what is tried and true and tested, and it doesn't incorporate the unpredictability of these black swan events, which have increased 11-fold since Y2K. And in order to build that resilience, personally, I love relying on the PESTLE trends model, so political, economic, sociological, technological, legal, and environmental. What is the impact to the stress that we are putting on the environment, not only to climate, the animal population, which gave us COVID as a present, as well as our own health, of course. And in living, we need to look at how to create sustainable businesses for the long term. And I think too often we are creating short-term competitive advantages in order to exploit an opportunity, and rather than creating goods and services that are lasting, adaptable, and agile. And I feel like if we try and really focusing on the E, maybe even starting with the E in the PESTLE trends, and that's just one way, one lens in order to view competitive advantage. And of course, Porter's diamonds model is certainly relevant. But I think in this environment, we need to also have conversations, because these conversations, it amazes me that these issues that were raised in general conversations with business leaders in the science world have these reverberations 20 years later. People see it coming, but that can get kicked down the road until it becomes a crisis. And I think making more data-driven decisions, understanding the long-term impact of corporate actions are going to create more successful businesses. We know that diverse and inclusive models that make sustainable business decisions are more successful in the market and create greater returns. So why aren't we doing it?
If I can add one small thing to that.
Absolutely, Zaire. Please, I was going to come over to you.
The question is about strategy and developing a competitive advantage. Are they still applicable today? They are, but what's happening is that those, as Karen said, those traditional models are not as relevant. And I'll tell you why. Because those models were created in a time when the rate of adoption and change was simply slower. Right now, right, it took TikTok 6 months or less to get to 70% of all teenagers in America. You compare that with how long it took the Walkman to get to all teenagers, right, which was years, right? The rate of adoption is faster. So agility is key, but what but agility, not just in terms of using agile management practices, but in terms of mindset and creating the product itself as being agile and mutable. In my opinion, cost is not going to be as, cost is always going to be relevant, but it's not going to be as easy to differentiate yourself via cost. However, the opportunity to differentiate yourself through product differentiation is greater than it has ever been. And companies that focus there are more likely to win, in my opinion.
So then we have a question from Tim, primarily for you, Karen, since I think he's carrying on a conversation with you here.
We were in E20. We were in E28 together.
Prepaid debit card.
Yeah.
I was going to answer that privately, but I can just do it really quick.
I am going to share it. I share the questions, as you know, Karen, because some folks may not be on their laptops and see the question. So as we move to more people working from home, what do you think will rise to replace the need for human interaction? And how do you feel about it being directed versus seeing what comes about spontaneously? Further down, he says, I find Zoom and other tools to be poor substitutes for coworkers and spontaneous interactions, the proverbial water cooler talk. Karen?
They are. And, I think those solutions have yet to be seen. So I welcome the opportunity for people to start collaborating. I think people are missing spontaneity in their lives and the ability just to check in with people. And I think even before COVID, you text, it's become a social norm now to text people before you call them. Rather than just calling people to say hi, that we're raising a new generation of folks who are loath to spontaneity. And they want to know what's coming. And I think we need to be more in increasing our resilience is being more open to spontaneity of conversations. So I don't really know, but I think, I've seen some interesting models, particularly happening out of Latin America. There's another friend of T-Bird's that has a company that is creating its own video conferencing platform that has been very successful in a corporate environment, but also in remote areas of Latin America. They're doing video depositions in legal environments. Telemedicine in Colombia is something that has been pretty much the norm for the last couple of years because there are so many remote opportunities. And Tim, I'd be happy to send you a copy of a paper that I wrote for the World Economic Forum on remote offices, because there are different ways to approach this conundrum. And the idea of leapfrogging in developing markets is something that's certainly relevant. We are looking to Africa, Latin America, and their uses of technology are becoming more easy. And even, TikTok is a Chinese model, which I think we also need to be concerned because there was a recent problem with not being in line with US policies. They've got all these kids under 13's emails. So that can be problematic as well. So we need to be more active in the digital environments, and it's no longer Silicon Valley's problem. And it's not something we have our arms around here. It's all of us are part of this digital world.
So we're reaching our last 3 minutes, and so I'm just gonna raise these questions, and Zahir and Olivia, I know, I'm sorry, Karen, you see them, but just for everyone, and then you could pick which ones you answer. Oscar's asking really about how could these digital middle-class entrepreneurs or workers start this innovation and get the skill sets they need for this transformative adaptation. Jim's asking, do we really have the infrastructure? He's focusing on the US, but one might argue globally, in place to move this approach forward, or is there a need for more investment, and in what areas? Certainly, if you look at the fiscal stimulus packages around the world, there's far more investment on the consumption and crisis management side than on the infrastructure building side and the reskilling side, I would argue. And Thomas is asking, is in the news today, millions of Americans could get their stimulus payment on a prepaid debit card. Is this a way for the public to ease into digital currency? And then finally, going back to the global level, relating to international trade, something you just started to intimate, Karen, given what's happening, the question that Derek's asking is, how do tech manufacturers are navigating global import and export control restrictions? Obviously, that's changing the landscape pretty dramatically in the COVID world, particularly vis-a-vis US and China, but really the world. So you don't have to take all of them, pick one or two, we're gonna all continue to carry on the conversation. First to you, Zahir, and then we'll end with you, Karen. Zahir?
I'll answer Jim and Derek in brief. Jim, there are some challenges in infrastructure. However, there are initiatives at play to enable this to be dealt with. Specifically, telecommunications is going to be revamped with 5G. No, it does not cause COVID, for God's sakes. And also by internet provided from orbit. So orbital platforms are going to revamp our ability to interact with things, because what people pay attention specifically to Starlink and Wi-Fi, but what is not so well known is that there are multiple vendors that are launching satellites specifically to provide connectivity to Internet of Things and automated systems throughout the globe. So the infrastructure is being built, and what's more, it's being built by private enterprise, which means it's going to be more nimble and agile. To answer Derek, what is going to happen in terms of import-export control, and particularly supply chain, is that you're going to be needing and this COVID is pushing us to actually using distributed ledger for what it should be used for. Meaning cryptocurrency is cute, but what the power of distributed ledger is in supply chain. And when you marry that to AI, and in fact, people are currently writing AI-enabled blockchain systems, what you're going to have is you're going to have innately smart supply chain and sourcing. And there's a really interesting company called ScoutBee. If you want to look them up, what they have done is they've implemented AI to procurement systems and supply chain. They're one of several in the field. They're probably the most advanced right now. And what you can do with that is you can build in the law, you can build in the regulations, you can build in sourcing, desirability of the sourcing. You can build in ethics. You can build in fair trade to all of this and optimize based off of all those different different types of stakeholders with your supply chain, and you can do it in an automated fashion. So that's where I think that's going to go, because humans are just too slow and they make mistakes in that realm. So what's going to happen is that the AI systems will execute these searches, and then humans will exercise human judgment on what the AI produces. I'll turn it over to you, Karen, to wrap up.
So I'd like to quickly answer Oscar's question: how do we prepare ourselves to become these digital middle-class entrepreneurs or workers to start this innovation and skills that will be needed for the transformation? And I'm going to do it with a demo. And because we're running out of time, and so I'm going to show, people say, oh, well, I need all this money to start a business. There is a desperate need for education right now and entertaining kids at home. People talk about augmented reality, but it's hard to see what it is. So here's your phone. Here is a VR headset. I am going to do the impossible. I am going to put my phone into the VR headset. That's what it is. I put it on my head, and I've got my, you can see there's built-in headphones. Now, video, we all know how to make a YouTube video. We can import that into Google Cardboard, which creates a immersive experience. Now, immersive VR videos increase retention for a class, or it increases retention by 34%. And given in this environment where there's so much going on and people are bombarded with information, this is a very cheap, cost-effective. That thing cost me $40. And, you know, I think there's plenty of opportunities for people to be making augmented reality videos on YouTube, just the way there are YouTube stars now. There is a brand new market opening up that costs next to nothing to create. So I'm just going to give you an example rather than answer it. And then I'm going to answer the easy one from Thomas. In the news today, should I just go forward, or were you, Zahir? Sorry, maybe.
No, please, you wrap up, Karen.
Right,
You got it.
Thomas, really.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. In the news today, millions of Americans could get their stimulus payments on a prepaid card. Is this the way for the public to ease into digital currency? I am not a fan of prepaid cards. They've been around for about 20 years now, and it is a liability. I know of several trust corporations that own residual amounts that they can't be paid. They're carrying them on their books. There needs to be a better, and I hate prepaid cards. I think, okay, I'll just say it, because people don't use the entire thing.
Let us know what you really think, Karen.
I know. Well, that's the problem with me. You know, if I really don't like it, I'm really going to tell you. So working at Visa for as long as I haven't, you know, it's always been a liability for companies to have these residual amounts on their cards. Cards get lost. It's hard to track. I think, and I've just got to say it, I was at a fundraiser for Kirsten Gillibrand maybe last summer, and she was talking about using the post office. And Zahir and I have talked about this before as a potential way for people to have their own bank accounts. Everyone should have a bank account. It's an impediment to creating wealth that people don't have them, and they need to have a place to keep their money and save their money and earn some interest, so we can lend out that money and generate some revenue. Why not?
Thank you so much, Karen and Zahir, and you're getting great, you know, thank you comments, and what an amazing Globinar. Really grateful. Just want to say to everyone, we have 3 principles at Thunderbird in our global family. One is, of course, to support everyone to be healthy and safe in every way possible, physically, of course, but also mentally and psychologically, spiritually. Number 2 is to provide as rich educational experiences as we can for all of our community, from our undergraduate students to our alumni and partners around the world. And 3 is really to provide the thought leadership and leadership more generally to help our communities all around the world embrace the new world, be able to succeed in it, but also do it with compassion and kindness and authenticity, the true sort of digital global mindset. I think this Globinar just proves how amazing T-Birds are here in the United States and all around the world. Please continue to join us for these Globinars as they proceed in the days and weeks ahead. We have them happening from all over the world, and oftentimes at the global level, with incredible topics and themes. If you have any suggestions, please let us know, because we always want to, you know, listen to our community and provide thought leadership and conversations that really are meeting the needs of all of you. We also have a fantastic new set of digital synchronous and asynchronous exec ed programs through Thunderbird, and particularly for our alums, with great discounts and pricing and scholarship for all of you as you continue to upskill, as we all continue to upskill. So thank you again, Zahir and Karen, phenomenal. Thank you to Olivia and Mike Grasso and the entire team for making this possible. Please stay safe and healthy, everyone. God bless.
Thank you all. It was really nice to be here.
Thank you all. And thank you to the Thunderbird team.
Sanjeev.
Thank you.